All right, now I'd like to welcome my very special guest this week, my cousin Barbara. Hey, welcome, Barbara.
Hi, cuz.
The background there. So, this is a very important episode to me. We're gonna go into our family history and my grandfather, Mark Berkowitz, who was a Holocaust survivor who survived Auschwitz. So first, before we talk about it, I'd like to play a clip. It's about a 5-minute clip, more like a speech that he gave in 1986 at Clark University.
There was nothing on earth that I could do except torment myself in order to analyze this thing. I couldn't analyze it. I could only accept it. And I could only deal with it by saying, it doesn't matter. It will pass tomorrow. If someone would have said to me, are you going to die from this? My answer would have been never. If someone would have said, are you going to be free someday? Yes. And when you're free, what are you going to tell the world? What are you going to do? Are you going to do the same thing to other people? My answer would be, I am going to tell people to be good, to be kind, to be considerate, because what I suffered, no human being should ever suffer. And so when new people came to Auschwitz, it wasn't easy because often they could not rationalize the place. They thought that they could sit and discuss how to escape or how to get away. The truth of the matter, it wasn't that simple, and very few people tried and very few people got away. It wasn't, as some people think, that besides the electric fence, after liberation, people found out how many posts you had to go through, and then you first had to cross over a river. And unfortunately, with a number on your arm, far you couldn't go. Without a set of clothing that would make you look like a civilized human being, you couldn't go very far. But faith, and what I told my twin sister, faith, pretend it doesn't hurt. The more it hurts, the more you have to pretend that it doesn't hurt. We owe it to our mother, we owe it to God to survive. And so one day, the ultimate day came. It was May 15th, maybe 30th. And Mengele ordered this particular camp, Bateswai Bay, which was a Czech family camp from Theresienstadt, to be liquidated, exterminated, annihilated. And then finally, they lined up all the guinea pigs. And I'll never forget, the gate was this way. And the boys were in this line, and the girls were in this line. And my mother was standing in barrack number 2, which is still there. And when I looked at my mother standing in line, and once you stood in line and you had Mengele with his entourage of all the big shots, you did not leave the line. When I saw my mother stand there and looking like a ghost, I broke away from the line, and my little twin sister grabbed my arms, and I went over and I said to my mother, we're not afraid. If you want to, we'll stay with you, and we'll do whatever we have to do together. And this is what my mother told me then. She said, mein Kind, glaub in Gott. My child, believe in God. Love God. Live and help these children because you seem to have a certain strength and courage to endure. Help your little twin sister, help the others. If you survive with hate and bitterness and only to seek revenge, I will ask God to send you to me. But if you survive loving humanity, and if you tell humanity what we went through for the sake of sharing with humanity so that we and our future may never have even to dream, even in a movie, to go through even reading a book about it to go through what we went through, because it's beyond words, it's beyond description. And what makes it even more difficult is that we were constantly dealing with educated, brilliant, cultured, civilized human beings. I know it. I was liberated, and I saw them when they were in my place. And let me tell you something, they were not proud of what they did. They wouldn't stand up and say, I did what I did, I believed in it, and nothing you could do to me would make me care because I am proud of what. They were all ashamed. Are we humans capable of doing terrible things to one another? Yes. Should we think 5 times before we ever do anything like that? We should not even think of doing anything like that. It should be a crime to think of harming another human being because he is whatever he is. We're all God's children. We're all one race, human race. And we should all care and love and share with one another. And that would make life worthwhile living. It's not how much you have, it's how much you can share. And I promised my mother that if I survive, I will share and I will not hate.
So powerful.
Yeah.
You know, what stood out to me when I rewatched it, and I'm going to post most of it in a separate episode. Well, it'll be this episode, but in a separate part of it. He mentions Ukraine and how rich the soil was, and how the family was in the ghetto there, and it's just jarring that we're in the same part of the world right now. How many years later? I mean, so many years from World War II, but also even from when he gave that speech in 1986. So it really hits home.
It does. When you asked me to do this, I revisited that. I'm a World War II buff because of your grandfather. The studying and the studying, and I hadn't watched that in a very long time. And and I've read part of his book, as you know, you have that, and it's just when my emotions with the Ukraine right now is it's being repeated. I mean, the abuse, the murdering of innocents, and I just keep thinking of your grandfather's words. Be kind. Don't not these things should never happen, and here we are. Again, it's happening. So yeah, well, I mean, just watching him just brings such emotion. He had just one of the most wonderful voices, didn't he?
Yeah,
It just so
really
good.
did.
Yeah,
The accent really helped
yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah,
And he never changed.
yeah,
We live in a culture. I think I was reading. I've mentioned this in the show before. I was going through, just the headlines yesterday, and I would say half the stories are people apologizing. They say something, they apologize. They say something, and they apologize. When he said something, he meant it.
yeah, yeah.
There wasn't going to be a retraction or, anything like that. And I think that was one of the things that was so amazing about him and so powerful about him, was that he had those core values that didn't change. I mean, to the point that Joseph Mengele, the head Nazi doctor, looked at him and was in awe of how he couldn't break him.
Well, he knew he was a liar. I mean, if you remember, there's what quote he said. He knew I knew he was a liar.
Yeah.
And I think he loved the strength. I mean, a 12-year-old boy, took on Mengele.
Right.
And he tried to break him. I
That
mean,
really happened.
he took on, but he did say that every year he get a phone call for many years just saying hello, and he said he knew it was him. He said they didn't get him; it was him.
Yeah,
So,
he was in, was it Argentina?
yep, yeah, a lot of them fled to Argentina.
Yeah.
So,
And people thought Grandpa, I think they were, I don't want to, I mean, maybe some thought he was crazy or some were just skeptical when he said, no, he's alive.
yeah.
and a lot of them are alive. And then it turned out a lot of them were alive in South America.
Well, they were planning. They had planned for that. There's from what my understanding is that there was a show out for a little while. I don't know if it was still out, but tracking them. And there's actually, places, underground cities and everything where they planned to flee. So, but your grandfather, I think the thing that stands out the most, that I wish I could be more like him in many ways, is his grace, his humbleness. Every time, when I was a young girl, I was protected by a lot of grandpa's history because we were young. I'm older than you, but I think it's, he took on this responsibility to tell the world by accident. If you think about it, he didn't plan this. It just was when he went and saw Mein Kampf. Isn't that when he saw himself?
In the
Yeah.
60s, right, in the 1960s, I think.
Yeah, when the Russians came in, and I feel bad because I thought the Americans actually liberated his part of the Auschwitz. It was not. It was the Russians, and he opened the gate for them. I mean, he was the one that opened the gate, so he knew it wasn't, rigged or anything. And I guess he was seeing Mein Kampf as a teenager, wasn't he? And he saw himself, and he stood up and said, "That's me." When they came and liberated him, but I think again, he lived because of because of his sister. Mengele's, unfortunately, Mengele's thing was he would torture the one, and then the other one, when that one died, he would kill the other one, and then he would do his autopsy. So he knew he had to live for Francesca. She never talked the way he talked. I mean, your grandfather made this his mission, especially when he would send you, your mom and your uncle and your grandmother. He sent them to the Catskills, and that's when he did most of his time when he wasn't at the furniture store,
Right.
really working and letting the world know. So
Yeah. When there was a movie, Big Fish, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie,
mm,
where the son kind of wants his father to. His father tells all these big tales, and he wants his father to stop living in fantasies, and he thinks his father is lying, and then he finds out at the end of his father's life that all the stories were true. So Grandpa used to talk. I mean, it's not that I didn't ever think that he wasn't telling the truth, but sometimes it was like, really, like Elizabeth Taylor, or all these presidents. And,
yep.
there was a story that he called Saddam Hussein, where he was involved in something with Iraq and releasing hostages. So, I mean, and it all turned out, as far as I know, it all turned out to be true, even the things that seemed more unbelievable. So when Spielberg wanted to make his life into a movie in the 80s, I mean, this guy, Grandpa's story
It's
uh,
incredible.
was incredible. I mean, literally incredible. Like, as far as even a movie, it's hard to believe it was real. Like you said, a 12-year-old boy standing up to arguably the most or one of the most powerful Nazis uh, at that, ever, really. I mean, there was an interview in People magazine, also in the 80s,
Mhm.
where Grandpa tells a story about Mengele asking him if he believed in God.
Yep.
And as he's asking that,
He's killing his mother.
yeah, well, that also was in that article. But in this story, he asked Grandpa if he believed in God. And as he's asking him that, he's grabbing for his revolver, sort of like, if you give the wrong answer,
Yeah.
you're done. And Grandpa said, yes, and without hesitation. So he really just an I mean, it really is incredible beyond words. I think Grandpa has said that before. I mean, there's just not words for what he went through, and really for who he is and was as a person. It's just I think growing up, like you said, his twin sister Francesca didn't really speak the way he did. When I was growing up, I thought all Holocaust survivors were like Grandpa,
Yeah.
but no, Grandpa was just Grandpa. I
No,
mean, that's just
he was unique. But
yeah,
in the end, though, just to show how really true to form, if you recall when he passed, your mom and your uncle went to his house, and there were restitution checks from Germany that he never cashed. Like a lot of people who survived, Germany had to pay restitution, kind of like I think we had to pay restitution to Japanese. during at one time. But his checks were never cashed from the German government for restitution for what, his loss and his family. And I mean, he just I was just like in awe of that when your mom told me that just before she passed. She's like, yeah, we went through, we were finding all these checks. We had to stop throwing out all the garbage because he would stick it in the middle of books and magazines. And so they had to stop what they were doing because grandpa, he held on to them, but he would not cash them. It was, to him it was blood money. It was blood money. And so that just shows true to form, there was an opportunity to capitalize on his losses. And no, he was one of the truest people. I told you I had spoken with my mom, and just so you realize something, I'm 58, and my father, your your uncle who passed last year, was Jewish, and my mother was Catholic. So 59 years ago, Jews and Catholics didn't come together. But
Right.
again, that's where your grandfather was. Very big on tolerance. My parents were disowned for a brief period of time till I was born because Jews and Catholics didn't come together. And so I'm raised by a Catholic mother and I had a Jewish father. So again, where your grandfather, and she was saying how, they came for, I think it was Christmas, and your grandmother said, no, we're Jewish, and he talked tolerance. And I used to love going to see your mom and your uncle and grandpa. I mean, when my dad would pick us up because my parents were divorced, when he said we were going to go see Bonnie and Andrew and Uncle Mark and Aunt Sandra, it was like the best thing. And I mean, your mother, was one of my heroes. And but it was a very tough life for Holocaust children, the survivors who had children. Your mom and your uncle, wherever he might be, really had a tough time because your grandfather spent a lot of his time trying to get the word to the world to be kind and good. And Holocaust children, the children of these Holocaust survivors, just really had a very difficult time. And your mom, once in a while would talk about that. Nothing really mean, but just just how difficult it was to be a child, because the fact that they could even have children, after everything that they went through.
Yeah, they didn't have a normal upbringing, and that's an understatement. I
Yeah.
mean, they didn't have that opportunity I mean, grandpa had his family, till he was 11 or 12, and then after that, I
Yep.
mean, so he had to learn everything on the fly,
Yep.
even to the point of not being able to read and write. I mean, he had to learn 7 languages while hiding in the woods in Ukraine and other parts of Eastern Europe. And then after the war, try to get to America and opening a furniture store. I mean, he did all that,
Yep.
and then to raise a family. I
Yep.
mean,
Yep.
there were
Well, you do know, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but you are, or one of his pride and joys, his grandson. I mean, of course, his daughter and his son, but his grandson. You were one of you were a baby, you were little, when I was around, but his grandson was everything to him. So that was, I don't know if you knew that or not, but you were.
I mean, we were very close.
Yeah, yeah. He was a good man. He was, I look back and I can't remember any negative thing about your grandfather. Not, his biggest hit was losing your grandmother, Aunt
Yeah.
Sandra. That I think that was harder than anything else because she was just his driving force. And he apologized. And if you read some of his articles, he apologized that, all those years he tried to do what's right for the world, and he felt that, he wasn't there for Aunt Sandra and the kids, and then you were the only one at that time, in from this article. And he did have some of that bothered him, that he made this part of his mission in life, and he ran a furniture store.
Right. In that lecture where I played the clip from, he says the baby in that lecture, and
That
I'm
was
the baby.
You're the baby. Yep, you're the baby.
I was 3 years old at that time.
Now think about it. Your mom is Jewish and your father is Catholic. Now,
Right.
yeah, I mean, you're looking at how many years ago. My generation, it was unheard of. In fact, I joke and I'm like, I was born into adversity. That's why everything in my life is adverse, in a positive way. Like
Right.
I can look at things, but I will tell you, one of the things you had said was, what was it like growing up Jewish? Well, I want to touch on that because there was shame, if you didn't understand. I grew up in New York, as did you. And then I remember being 18. This is a true story. It's sad, but it's true. I was working at Macy's. That was my first job, and I got a paycheck, and there was a woman behind the counter, and she saw my last name was Rothman because I went back to my maiden name. And she kept saying, "Let me see, let me see." And I'm like, "What do you want to see?" She said, "Your horns. Don't Jews have horns?" So without missing a beat, because I have my dad's humor, I go, "No, I only have one horn. I'm only half a Jew." You know, it's like, but people genuinely believe that we were heathens, and it was very difficult. Being raised then, and then your great grandmother, Grandma Susie, put me in a yeshiva preschool because my mom worked. And it was kind of funny because here I was, this little Catholic girl in a yeshiva preschool. So there was always that. And when I was in my early teens, I decided to look into becoming, more Jewish. And so I joined B'nai B'rith. And the point of this is it affects us today is they did a thing where you go away for a weekend, and we were teenagers, and they had us escape from Germany, and they did, and it was so real, Jonathan. I get chills thinking about it because I was like 16, and what they did is you had to go like your grandparents, your grandfather went through, from place to place, and we started out with hundreds of us, and in the end there was maybe 30 of us. I happened to survive, but there was 30 of us left because they were being murdered, of course, fictionally along the way. And as young Jewish children, teenagers, it was just, you just sat there. Like your grandfather said, you couldn't grasp what these people went through. So for me, it was very difficult growing up. And I grew up on both sides, so I got to see both ends of it. And now here you are, and it's no big deal that your mom was Jewish and your father was Catholic. And it's like, okay. So it's just the times have changed. But here we are, 75 years, 76 years later, and we're repeating it in the Ukraine. And the world was quiet then, and the world is watching, but the world still is doing nothing. And that's hard.
I feel there's almost a moral obligation for Jewish people, but also more so for the ancestors of Holocaust survivors, to make sure that their message is not forgotten. We're the only ones that can pass it on. And even culturally in America, with all the division, I mean, Jewish people are in a position as a white minority, I think, to bridge people together. The Jewish people have a history of repression going back thousands of years. And I really feel like Jewish people can and have brought people together. I mean, it may be a stereotype, but there's even so many Jewish comedians.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So much laughter. How are there any Jewish comedians? I mean, you would think everything that Jewish people have went through, the sense of humor would have been beaten out, but it's the opposite. The sense of humor is part of the survival. And Grandpa was big on laughter,
yes,
and love, and all those great things. And that is what made his message so powerful. Is that, how is this guy not hateful? How is
none,
it possible?
none. He preaches love. He preaches forgiveness. He preaches humbleness. And they said, "Did you hate the Germans?" He said, "Then I would be no better than them."
If somebody cuts you in line at Popeye's Chicken right now, or gets the last chicken sandwich, people get shot. Like.
Oh no, I do know, and it's funny, as you know, I lost my father last year. Today, tomorrow is the his burial anniversary of 1 year, and then of course, as you know, the 15th is your mother's birthday, which was the day we buried my father. And it changed me in a sense that it was a useless death, as you know. COVID is horrible, but it kind of put me in a different position, and I'm going to share my job now with you, and I think you can just drop your mouth, but I actually, as you know, I'm a nurse, and I am working in a facility with geriatric, very old murderers, rapists, and pedophiles, and I have to say my prayer before I go in, and I kind of smile, and I look up at the sky. I'm like, "Father, if you can wash their feet, I can wash their tushies." And I walk in to this facility, and everyone always says, "How are you?" I'm fantastic, and even if I'm not, and it's starting to catch on, And I actually had a coworker who happened to be of German descent, and she would walk around counting in German. And at first, I took it that she was trying to terrorize me because she's just I interpret it that way. And it was getting pretty bad. People were very uncomfortable. And this is just over the last month around us, Jonathan. And I'm like, I have to fix this, because whatever her issue is, I don't know. And I bought her a card, and I went up to her and I gently put her hand on her shoulder. This was just 3 weeks ago. And I said, please, we're women of God. I'm like, we're both cancer survivors. We have to stop whatever this is and let's get past it. And so she did. She accepted my grace and my humbleness, and I hugged her. And I see her almost every day when I'm at work. And last night I worked with her. And it's a choice. The point is, you choose joy. It was a choice. Your grandfather chose joy. Your grandfather showed kindness and compassion and forgiveness. And we don't always know what the other person is going through, and I'm not excusing what the Germans did, but we just don't know. I mean, why are Russian soldiers just following and doing what they're doing? They're going beyond. They're violating the Geneva Convention, but they're going beyond what's allowed in a war. Why did the Germans, all of these millions of Germans, do this? And it wasn't just Jews. There were 13 million people died. Why? And you're reading the stories. I know you're following it as closely as me. And one man, and they put him on the ground, and he looked up and he said, why? And he shot him dead. Why is there so much evil? And that's what your generation is, our saving generation, Jonathan. You have to do something, because my generation is older. We're getting older, but your generation's forgetting. You
Yes.
can't allow them to forget, Jonathan. You must tell Grandpa's story.
My generation is probably too busy on TikTok right now,
Yeah.
or the next generation. But there are many of us that are not, that haven't forgotten, that are in my generation and the next. But yeah, it's not pleasant stuff, and a lot of people today want to just have fun, and the Holocaust is not fun. It's
No.
not fun to talk about. It's not fun to think about. People want to forget because it's so unpleasant. Why would you want to remember it? You want to say, "Oh, we're better now." The world, clearly we're not, but we want to live in that denial that the Holocaust was a isolated thing, or that the Holocaust is over. And that was Grandpa's message. It's not about Germany. He
Mm-mm.
said there's people today that want to reopen Auschwitz, but they won't call it Auschwitz. They'll call it something else,
Right.
and it may be a different group of people, but it's the same mentality. So he didn't want to blame the Germans, because the next time it might not be the Germans. It might be a different group. It might be a different country. And it's not even about a group of people. I think evil just kind of takes over groups. Like, those symbols weren't even German. The swastika is not German. Or Hitler wanted blonde hair and blue-eyed people. He had dark hair and dark eyes. So none of it was logical. Evil is not logical.
No.
I want to correct something. You were right. I remembered when he asked him if he believed in God. It was after seeing his mother go to the gas chamber,
Yeah.
and he still said, "I came into this world believing in God. I will leave believing in God." And
If
he
you
didn't.
if you recall, how he did that is he made sure your grandfather saw her going to the gas chamber.
Yes,
He sent him
and
out to pick vegetables.
and still couldn't break him.
Right.
So the compassion there, in terms of, you were talking about inclusion and compassion, that he had one of the first integrated soccer teams, that he was a player and coach in Czechoslovakia, great soccer player. And he always said, whoever the best players play, that's
Right.
it. It doesn't matter what color you are, what background you are, best players play, and we all bleed the same color.
Yep.
And there was a story where uh, a German player had knocked, I think, Grandpa down, and saw his number on his arm, and then helped him up. Those were the kind of, just those little moments uh, that people need to hear, because there's so much hate on TV and so
Right.
much division. For him to be able to play soccer uh, with German players at that time, and listen, there were fights. There was a great story where the FBI had called the house. What had happened earlier, they were somewhere, and a fight broke out between some Jewish people and some Germans, I believe. And the FBI was watching people within the group. So I guess Grandpa was there, but he wasn't a fighter. We all know that. You know
Yeah.
that. So I think maybe he was watching, or, I'm sure he was trying to get them not to fight. And then the house called, and Grandma Sandy picked up, and it was the FBI. and she turns to Grandpa Mark and she goes, "Mark, what did you do now?"
Yeah, yeah, she yeah, your grandmother was not as warm as your grandfather was. She was, yeah, it's interesting. Um,
Well, he was always traveling the
yeah,
country.
right.
I mean,
And
he, I
that's why I
mean,
said he would send all of you. He would send Aunt Sandra and your mom and my aunt, obviously your grandmother, to the Catskills because that's where all the Jews went. You know, they went to the Catskills. And I guess my mom said that my father tried to send her to the Catskills with us, and she's like, "What do I go to the Catskills for?" And then years later, my mother took a job at the Concord in the Catskills, so it's kind of funny. And we moved to the Catskills for a few years. But yeah, I have to be honest. You know, looking at you and looking at your sisters and seeing where you are, there's a big part of your grandfather, and you especially. I see it. I saw it at your wedding. I see it in how you communicate. You know, remember when I first actually met you as an adult was when Mom was pretty sick, and I had flown down there, and I just remember just you know how you were talking about different things, and you know, and that's a different topic, of course. And I just looked at your mom. I'm like, this kid is brilliant. She's like, I know, just like that. She's like, I know. And I'm like, wow. Because the things coming at you, I was like in awe of you. I was so in awe of you. And, you know, I mean, it's such a young man to have your depth. And I'm so proud of you. I want to say, and your mother would be so proud of you right now. And your grandfather is just dancing up there going, look at him, look at him, look at him. So I'm so grateful that you even considered asking me to do this, to be part of this, because it means a lot. Sorry.
thank you so much for saying that. I mean, it really means a lot to me, and I'm not as young as I used to be, but there's something blocking the camera. Um,
Oh, is there?
yep,
Oh, what do you mean? I was trying to hold it up. Sorry.
there we go. Yeah. Um, but you know, yeah, it's very. I knew it was going to be an emotional conversation
Yeah,
and an
but
emotional episode.
it's smiling. You know, um I think we could look at it because we're a step back. You're two generations from it, and I'm a cousin. You know, your mom and your uncle, you know, obviously lived a lot of it. And but again, I cannot remember a moment ever not wanting to be around your grandfather. Like there's not one time in my life as a young girl. I couldn't wait to be around your family. And you know, anytime my dad would say, "Hey, let's go see," I'm like, "Yay!" And of course, your mother was this beautiful, beautiful, statuesque woman, and you know how much I loved her a lot.
You know, I know a lot of people. You mentioned COVID earlier, and I'm sorry about Uncle Eddie last year. To people out there who've lost people in the last year, or have lost people, not just for COVID, but not just because of COVID, but for any reason. You know, my I went through a tough time with grief and grieving. I think what I mean, we've been talking about Holocaust and Jewish issues, but I think grief is very important to mention. What helps me is that when I look at these videos of Grandpa Mark, and I think of my mom, Bonnie. You know, what helps me is that I feel very blessed to have had them. You know,
Yeah,
so it doesn't mean it's not sad,
yeah,
but some people, like you said, you were so excited to be around my family or be around Grandpa Mark.
yeah,
A lot of people never met Grandpa Mark or never had a version of him. You know, so I feel so blessed. I'm so grateful we have these videos saved, and there's a lot of recordings like cassette tapes, if you remember those, right?
oh,
But cassette, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
uh, of his interviews. You know, especially when they were working on that transcript for the messenger, of which he was the the errand boy for Mengele.
yeah.
Um, and
What a
Grandpa
response.
being, yeah, Grandpa Mark being a blonde hair, blue eyed twin, of which only I think 13 sets of twins survived the whole war, something very small number. So I mean, he could have easily, if a bomb landed in the wrong spot, he gets killed. I'm never born.
Yeah.
So I feel so blessed that he survived, and that we had him for when we did. It was never going to be long enough. But
Of
it's
course.
definitely important for me to carry on his message the best I can. It's a tough world to do that because, like I said, people just want to laugh. I want to laugh, and how do you make the Holocaust into a 5-second clip that people will watch? You can't. You need people that have an attention span, and people that have a mind, and people that will think, and people that will care, and
And believe.
and believe.
I mean, if you see the interviews right now, the Russian people don't believe that Ukraine is happening. Russian people don't believe it. They're interviewing them, and they're like, "What are you talking about? That's not happening." Or they're calling the Russian president a Nazi, and I believe his grandfather or his uncles were killed in Auschwitz. So he's like, "Wait, what? I'm Jewish. What do you mean I'm a Nazi?" So, people are going to believe, and it's very sad. I mean, it's like they're just sheep and they follow. They just follow, and it's
The
hard because
internet. Yeah, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
The internet didn't exist in when Grandpa was giving that speech in the 80s. So you had people
Right.
showing up to that lecture. And I hope people will continue to show up to lectures in person because you didn't have the internet back then. So now people might say, oh, the internet is a great thing, which it is. People can mobilize, people um, can communicate very quickly. But I think that the downside of that is the misinformation,
Hmm.
is the distraction. So there's a lot more information, and a lot of that information is not good information, is not accurate information, and people don't know what to believe, so they start not believing anything. So back then, I think it was easier to to get your message out there without having a billion people interpreting it, or Grandpa didn't give that speech and then have 1,000 comments in the section. It just happened and then it was out there. So I think there's that added element to get through to people because they have so much distraction and just so much information or inaccurate information. Who knows? I
Yep.
mean, you just never know. And some things are so crazy, it's hard to even believe it's true. I mean, you could see a comet right now and coming at the Earth, and you wouldn't like that movie. Don't Look Up, right? That
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. I actually avoid American media and I go to the BBC, believe it or not,
I believe it.
because I don't know who to believe. I mean, what is the BBC saying? Because you just don't know which ways, and it becomes a political thing, and it's like this isn't politics. There's women, children, men, old, young, being murdered, and animals. I mean, shooting dogs. I mean, I was laying here the other night. I have 4 little dachshunds. I think you only met Max. And I was thinking of the choices these people had to make in the Ukraine or anywhere, even World War II, and having to leave their homes and things behind. What do you pick, and how do you leave your pets behind? My dogs sleep with me, Jonathan. What do you pick? How do you choose? How do you know? You take your dog, but you have no dog food. You take your cat, but you have no cat food and Kayla. You take your children. Do you have baby formula? It's like, think of the millions of people who just left the Ukraine and the choice to do that, and the people during the Holocaust who were running. I mean, people were running and trying to leave their homeland, their countries, to go away, and leaving everything they love behind and the people they love behind. So I mean, this has affected me a little bit. I'm older than you, but it's affected me very emotionally, and I'm like, I would never leave my dogs. I'd arm myself and take my chances, but it's very hard for me. I mean, that'd be like Mexico saying, I want Texas back, and just invading. It's like,
Mhm.
who does this? It's 2022.
Before
And
we
here,
came on the air, I was thinking about the whole thing, and I
yeah,
think Americans, we probably want to look at you know how people looked at us when we go into other countries, and I'm not just talking about Iraq. I'm talking about South
yep,
America,
yep,
Central America. We're looking at what's going on and saying it's genocide, it's a dictator. Well, look at how Europe looked at us and the world looked at us when we were doing some of our interventions, so to speak, in other countries. So when we do something, we look at it a different way. We use different descriptions and different language. And listen. I'm not saying that anything that we've done is identical to
you're not
what's
attacking me.
happening,
Yeah.
but we do need to realize that whenever we do any sort of military intervention, the world will be watching. And we want to make sure that whatever we do is for the right reasons and that we do it in the right way, because we do not want to be compared to what's going on over there. We want to be better, that we want to be a shining light to the world, that when we fight a war, it's because we have to and not
Right.
because we want to or for any other reason. So yeah, it really hits home, the whole thing. My job, it's on in the break room. I don't know if they took the batteries out of the remote, but it's on in the break room all the time. And I just have trouble even kind of processing it because it's just it's
And here
confusing.
we are. Now
Yeah, like
imagine.
here we are. Like how are we back here?
Yep. And that's what your grandfather was saying in that last clip that you had. Just, you can't get your brain around it. You just can't get your brain around it. And I look at every night. I have a 45-minute break before we clock out. I mean, in the facility where I work, and I go right to the internet, and I go to the BBC and I see what's going on and seeing what's where and where are we in this, because again, I know about World War II. I mean, that's it was one of my minors was political science and worldviews, and watching this, it's like, oh boy, how does the world not see this, or does the world see it and just saying, well, it's not going to happen again, and it is. I mean, Zelensky, he's all over. Please, I'm begging you. This man is begging the world, and the world is just sitting on the border, saying, well, you're not part of NATO. What does that mean? These are human beings, women and children. Most touching moment I saw, and I think it's something, again, thing about your grandfather and his grace, was the Polish women were leaving baby carriages for the women fleeing the Ukraine for their babies. They were just leaving at the border. So when the women came, because they left with nothing, so they had places to put their baby. I mean, there's so much humanity coming out of this as well. I mean,
Right.
Animals, and I'm an animal nut.
Same.
Saving the dogs and the cats that are being left behind. I mean, how do you choose? You got to leave your pet.
Grandpa was big on that how you treat animals.
Oh yeah, shows who you are.
He was at in Rockland County. He was at a what do you call? There was a conference about saving the Canadian geese, and he was a big part of saving them. He was, it's amazing how much I love ducks and birds, and he loved them too. And it's not like we ever even talked about it. So it is amazing how much is,
Is it?
ingrained. Yeah, is it? Yeah.
There's enough of him in you and around you and your closeness to him that he would be very proud of you. He is proud of you, but he would, he's looking down going, that's my grandson. Kiss my tushy, Mangala.
Boobala, right? Boobala. We never really talked much about it because I didn't want to bring all those memories back. I figured the last thing he'd want to talk about, we would get pizza and
yeah,
just talk about whatever. And I like what you said about the media here. I feel like I was thinking about World War II and how that would look today. You would have, one side would be, saying Roosevelt is colluding with the Japanese, and they would be looking at Roosevelt's tweets from 1920.
right.
And then the other side, would be, saying that, maybe the camps are fake news. So these two sides are, and it's something I'm going to talk about a lot in my show going forward. These two extremes they're dividing us, and it's not who we are. And it really stood out to me in that video how Grandpa a couple times said, "I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're Republican. I don't care if you're Jewish. I don't care if you're Christian. I don't care if you're Hindu. We're all God's children, and we all deserve to be able to live our life without taking somebody else's freedom away." And he talked about the importance of freedom. He even said, when he said something along the lines of, "I wasn't saved, or I wasn't rescued, I was liberated."
Right. He uses liberated a lot.
Yeah.
He uses that a lot. I mean, think about it. Your grandfather opened the doors for the Russians to come in and liberate Auschwitz. Hey, do you realize the gravity of that? Your grandfather did that. Opened the gates, took a chance that it wasn't, wired or to explode, and opened those gates and allowed and let the Russians in to liberate that camp and save those people. So that's huge. It's not, it's just like another person, or your grandfather did that. So that's just, and your grandfather saved your your aunt, your great aunt. So yeah, you should
And
be
he
proud.
was
You better get that book published, or you better
yeah,
get that movie made.
something. Can this count as a book?
Pretty
Books
much.
are really hard to write, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't know. Grandpa always wanted me to write a book, and like, it's really hard though. It's
I said if I ever wrote one, the title would be "Out of Adversity Came Me." I mean, again, like I started the opening of this as my mother was Catholic, my father was Jewish, and that didn't happen then. And now here you are, how many years later, a half Jewish, half Catholic young man, doing this podcast, and for your grandfather who is a survivor of Auschwitz. So impressive.
so thank you so much. And I just want to end with that. Grandpa, when they asked Grandpa to pick up a gun, he refused.
Yep, he threw it
He-
down. He said, "No more,
no more.
no
No
more."
more killing. He did not want revenge. He didn't want more killing, and he did say, if you have to defend yourself, defend yourself. But outside of that, um, he was a very peaceful man, and he survived hell on earth without hurting anybody.
Yep.
And actually, and to end, he would be the last in line when everybody would rush to get tea. He
Yep.
would wait in line because he knew all the sugar was at the bottom. So
Oh,
he would wait till the end, and then he would still give that away.
yeah.
That's the kind of person he was. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I love you, cousin.
I love you.
Thank you for doing this. God bless you.
Uh, God bless you.
Love to that beautiful wife of yours.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
But the truth of the matter is, faith is a very strong and a very beautiful thing. And with faith in God and love for humanity, that is not because I have to, but because I want to. That's the big difference. I am here today, and I hope that I can share this someday with future generations, only to say one thing, that the most beautiful thing in life is still to love, to share, and to care, and to realize that life does have an end. We don't have to end it. It comes to an end, and no one knows when that end comes. I love you. God bless you. And may you never forget to remember, and always remember not to forget, that we're all God's children. Thank you.